All right, let's take this a bit further now with Manuel Ochsenreiter, a German journalist who's certainly spent at least the past few years focusing on Syria. Thanks so much for joining us here on RT today. Do you think a U-turn or a delay? How do you interpret Obama's message to the nation?
Well, we witnessed yesterday a very confusing speech of the US-American president. He gave two messages which were completely contradicting each other. The first message is clear. He was saying the Syrian government used chemical weapons against civilians. He was saying gassing children by the Syrian government. He said it needs a strong answer, it needs a strong response. He was even saying it's a threat to the national security of the United States of America. So he was urging on this point, and then he had to justify the delay of this answer. I think it's very confusing, and this speech yesterday shows a bit the diplomatic chaos, especially in the United States.
But you talk about diplomatic chaos. I mean, there's been so much fuss, so much warmongering, the banging of the drums, the rattling of the saber, war, strike, intervention. It's got to happen. But what's changed for Obama? At RT, we've been discussing a lack of support both on a domestic front, but also internationally. What's happened?
Well, we see the alleged most powerful man in the world, the US-American president, being complete lonely with his position. We see the warmongering is coming from the Western governments, especially from the US government, but he doesn't have any support of the population. We see also the warmongering, by the way, by the mainstream media. But Barack Obama knows very well that even if the Congress permits a military strike, a military aggression against Syria, it would be maybe with a very small majority. So he would have to govern a split nation. Already now he is governing a split nation, so he has to delay so that this doesn't come out now. He's in a very, very difficult and a very weak position right now.
What about the issue of chemical weapons disarmament? If indeed Assad did relinquish every little can and device and container of chemical weapons, do you think then that means there will be no such attack against Syria in the future?
No, I don't think so. I think we have to see this chemical weapons as a thing how the Syrians see this, the Syrian population and the Syrian government. The chemical weapons for the Syrians are a sort of protective armor. For them, it's the psychological value of the possession of those weapons is very important. They say if we give up those weapons, we will be open for our enemies. And we don't have to forget that the discussion about the chemical weapon stockpile of the Syrian army is not just going on now since a couple of days. It's going on since the early 90s. Since the early 90s, especially Israel, but also the West and so on, tried desperately to bring Syria to give up those weapons. So I think for the Syrian government, this is not a very easy decision. And I think that maybe they must have any idea. And we don't have to forget what else can happen, that this chemical disarmament might open a complete new political and also military scenario. Because what happens if the Syrian government agrees now to the disarmament of the chemical weapon stockpile, and the West claims later on, but they didn't give us everything, they are still hiding. We witnessed, by the way, almost the same scenario with Iraq in the year 2003, and we know how it ended. So this is not an assurance for peace at all. It just delays right now.
Yeah, of course. And as we know, Mr. Ochsenreiter, with the Obama administration and the Secretary of State, John Kerry, talking about the so-called use of chemical weapons by the Assad government, using words such as "we believe" and "we have high confidence" and "we trust our sources on their initial findings." Manuel Ochsenreiter, we'll have to see how it plays out. A German journalist focusing on Syria. Thanks for joining us here on RT today.